The card terminal flashed declined, but I didn't panic. I actually laughed. My husband thought blocking my access to $5,000 would make me crawl back to him on my knees. I looked at his text message demanding I learn my place. I smoothed my silk gown and stepped toward the gala ballroom. I wasn't going in there to beg for money. I was going in to shut down his entire world. My name is Vivian Caldwell. I am 34 years old, and exactly 3 minutes ago, my credit limit was slashed to 0. The bartender at the Grand Meridian Hotel lowered his eyes in professional embarrassment as he handed the sleek black card back to me. He whispered that the transaction had been declined. I did not flush with shame. I did not fumble for a backup card that I knew would also be dead. Instead, I tipped him with the $50 bill I had tucked into my clutch for emergencies and took the glass of sparkling water anyway. My phone vibrated against my palm. The screen lit up with a message from Brandon Hale. "When you learn your place, the cards will be unlocked. Go home." I stared at the pixels. My husband thought he was teaching an unruly pet a lesson. He believed that by cutting off my access to our joint accounts, he would force me to retreat to our penthouse in tears, waiting for him to return so I could beg for forgiveness. He thought this was a punishment. He was wrong. This was the starting gun. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown and turned toward the double doors of the ballroom. I was not here to apologize. I was here to balance the books. The gala was in full swing. The air smelled of orchid arrangements, expensive cologne, and desperate ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden haze over 200 of the city's most predatory financial elites. They laughed and clinked glasses, making deals that would ruin thousands of regular families while they celebrated their own genius. It was all beautiful, and it was all entirely fake. Then the crowd parted. Marjorie Hale made her entrance. My mother-in-law moved through the room with the entitlement of a queen visiting her subjects. She wore silver, cold and metallic, but it was the woman beside her who drew every eye. Delilah Vance walked a half-step behind Marjorie, wearing a dress the color of fresh arterial blood. It was a statement piece. It screamed that she was the new favorite, the younger, hungrier replacement ready to ascend the throne. Brandon spotted them and beamed. He looked the part of the successful heir, holding court near the center of the room. When his eyes landed on me, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into a mask of pity. He walked over, intercepting me before I could reach the main table. His hand gripped my elbow with just enough pressure to bruise. "I thought I told you to—" "Go home," Brandon whispered through his teeth, his voice low so the nearby investors would not hear the venom. "I am just here to support you, darling," I said. My voice was steady. He turned to the man beside him, a potential investor named Mr. Sterling. "This is Vivian. You will have to excuse her. She is beautiful, but she does not understand these things. Finance bores her to tears." "It is true," I said, smiling at Mr. Sterling. "I leave the complex numbers to Brandon. He is so creative with them." Brandon squeezed my arm tighter, interpreting my comment as submission rather than a threat. He did not know. None of them knew. Brandon believed he was the CEO of Hale Holdings. Marjorie believed she was the matriarch who pulled the strings, but they had never read the fine print of the original trust founded by my grandmother. They did not know that I held a silent veto power over every major asset liquidation. They thought I was a guest in their empire. They did not realize they were squatters in mine. My phone buzzed again, a single short pulse against my hip. It was not Brandon this time. It was a message from an encrypted number. "If they dirty you tonight, just nod. We are ready." I did not check the phone. I did not need to. I knew the team was in the surveillance van 2 streets over, watching the live feed. I raised my left hand to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The movement drew attention to the heavy diamond cuff on my wrist. Marjorie had sneered at it earlier in the week, calling it gaudy. She did not know that the large center stone concealed a high-capacity data drive. Every fake invoice, every hidden debt, and every unauthorized transfer Brandon had made in the last 6 months was recording directly to that bracelet. I looked at Brandon, then at Delilah, who was now laughing too loudly at one of Marjorie's jokes. "Enjoy the champagne," I thought. "It is the last thing you will ever taste that you didn't pay for with your dignity." The seating chart was a masterpiece of social engineering. While Brandon, Marjorie, and Delilah held court at table 1, right in the center of the golden spotlight, I found my place card at table 19. It was situated near the kitchen doors, where the waiters burst in and out with trays of filet mignon. When the official photographer asked for a family photo, Brandon did not wave me over. Instead, he pulled Delilah closer by the waist. "Just the core team for this one," Brandon said, his smile tight for the camera. "We want to project strength." I stood in the shadows of a potted palm, watching my husband pose with his mistress. I sipped my water. The humiliation was designed to be public. A slow burn meant to strip away my defenses layer by layer. Marjorie made sure of that. Her voice carried across the room with practiced projection. "It is so tragic when women forget their fundamental duties," Marjorie said, looking directly at me across the room while pretending to address the mayor's wife. "A wife should be a sanctuary, not a drain on resources. But some girls, well, they just never learn the value of a dollar earned." Delilah laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. She leaned forward, placing a possessive hand on Brandon's shoulder. "Oh, Marjorie, stop," Delilah said, though her eyes danced with triumph. "I do not mind helping Brandon with the late nights. When we were going over the restructuring of the Asian Pacific accounts last night, I told him, 'Brandon, you are working too hard, but someone has to understand the vision.' 'Right. You are the perfect partner, Delilah.'" A heavy-set banker at their table boomed, "That is exactly the kind of support a CEO needs. Not just a pretty face, but a brain for the business." Brandon preened under the praise. He raised his glass of scotch. "We are closing the Titan deal tomorrow morning. $2 billion. Hostile takeover. We are not even waiting for the standard audit. When you see an animal wounded, you do not check its pulse. You go for the throat." The table erupted in appreciative laughter at his ruthlessness. I sat quietly, cutting my steak. Brandon thought waiving the audit was a power move. I knew it was suicide. I had read the Titan files weeks ago when he left them on his desk. The company was not wounded. It was a Trojan horse filled with toxic debt that would liquidate Hale Holdings within a fiscal quarter. He was bragging about swallowing poison. "And Mrs. Hale," a voice said beside me. It was the older gentleman from earlier. "Mr. Sterling." He had wandered away from the VIP table, looking bored. "I assume you have your own pursuits. A woman of your poise must have a background in something other than, well, watching from the sidelines." Before I could answer, Marjorie appeared at his elbow. She had an uncanny radar for any moment I might be treated with dignity. "Oh, Arthur, you are too kind," Marjorie purred, placing a hand on his arm. "Vivian used to dabble in art history, I believe. Or was it interpretive dance? She does not work. Vivian's full-time job is spending my son's inheritance." The table went silent. It was a direct, brutal cut. I looked down at my hands, letting them see the shamed wife. Then I looked up, blinking innocently. "Actually, I do have a question about the Titan deal." "Brandon," I said, pitching my voice just loud enough to carry to the investors nearby, "since you are skipping the audit, does that mean we assume personal liability for their pension shortfalls? I remember reading in a magazine that unaudited pension gaps can pierce the corporate veil." The silence at the main table changed texture. It went from awkward to sharp. Mr. Sterling narrowed his eyes, looking from me to Brandon. "She reads too many tabloids," Brandon said quickly, his laugh sounding brittle. Don't worry your pretty little head about pension gaps. Viv, that is grown-up talk. Oh, I am sorry, I said, widening my eyes. I thought if the veil is pierced, then personal assets are seized, like the houses and the boats. But I am sure you checked, Mr. Sterling did not laugh. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on Brandon with a new, cold calculation. I picked up my fork again. I let them dismiss me. I let Marjorie sneer and Delilah gloat. The more they underestimated me, the more invisible I became. And in a room full of people shouting about their power, invisibility was the only weapon that mattered. Enjoy your moment, I thought, watching Brandon sweat under Mr. Sterling's gaze. Because the check is coming due. I think the heat is getting to me, I whispered to a passing waiter, pressing the back of my hand against my forehead. I swayed slightly, just enough to look fragile, just enough to be dismissed as the weak, ornamental wife who could not handle the intensity of the room. Brandon did not even turn his head. He was too busy laughing at a joke about tax evasion. I slipped through the side door, but the moment the heavy oak panels clicked shut behind me, my posture straightened. The dizziness vanished. I moved with the precision of a soldier entering enemy territory. I bypassed the main lobby and took the service elevator. The metal box smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the orchids downstairs, but I preferred it. It smelled like work. I pressed the button for the penthouse floor. The doors slid open to reveal the VIP suite I had booked under a shell company name 3 weeks ago. The room was dark, lit only by the blue glow of server racks and monitors set up on the dining table. A young man in a gray hoodie, my liaison from the forensic accounting firm, stood up and handed me a thick manila envelope without a word. The addendum, he said. He signed the draft copy 10 minutes ago in the cigar lounge. I ripped the envelope open. My eyes scanned the pages, not as a wife reading a love letter, but as the auditor I was trained to be before I buried my resume to play the role of Mrs. Hale. I traced the lines with my manicured fingernail. It was worse than I thought. The asset valuation was inflated by 40%. The bad debt from the subsidiary was hidden in a complex derivative structure on page 52. And there, buried in the indemnity clause, was the kill shot a provision that transferred all personal liability to the primary guarantor? Me. Brandon had not just made a bad deal. He had framed me to take the fall for a bankruptcy that would happen before the fiscal year ended. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Rowan Pierce, my attorney, who was currently downstairs mingling with the sharks. Do not block it. Let him sign. I need the intent to defraud to be absolute. I tossed the phone onto the velvet sofa and walked into the dressing room. The midnight blue silk gown, the one Brandon had chosen because it made me look soft and compliant, fell to the floor in a shimmering heap. I kicked it aside. Hanging on the rack was my armor. I pulled on the structured black trousers and the matching blazer with sharp architectural shoulders. It was a suit that demanded silence when it entered a room. I walked back to the equipment table and picked up a wireless lapel microphone, no larger than a button. I slipped it under the lapel of my blazer, hiding the wire. The technician at the computer nodded. "We are patched into the ballroom audio," he said. "One tap, and you override the main feed." "Good," I said. "Turn the gain up." I want them to hear me breathe. I fastened the buttons, feeling the fabric hug my ribs like a second skin. I scraped my hair back into a severe, high ponytail, exposing the sharp angles of my face. I stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was not Vivian the housewife. She was not Vivian the victim. She was the majority shareholder. "Tonight," I whispered to my reflection, my eyes hard as flint. "Tonight, I do not ask for the card back. I reclaim my life." The timing was impeccable. I stepped through the main doors just as the master of ceremonies, a man whose smile was as synthetic as the floral arrangements, tapped the microphone. "And now, before we sign the historic papers," the MC announced, his voice booming, "let us hear a word from the woman behind the man. Please welcome the lovely Mrs. Hale." It was a trap. Marjorie had orchestrated this. She knew I hated public speaking. She expected me to stumble, to blush, to mutter a few inanities about how proud I was, and then retreat to the shadows while the men did the real work. She wanted a mute prop. She got a prosecutor. I walked toward the stage. The click of my heels on the marble floor was rhythmic and aggressive. The room quieted, not out of respect, but out of confusion. Gone was the submissive wife in the blue silk. In her place stood a woman in a sharp black suit, moving with a predatory grace. Brandon's smile froze. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out to intercept me before I could reach the podium. His grip on my arm was firm, a warning disguised as affection. "Vivian, honey," Brandon whispered, his teeth clenched behind his grin. "You are confused. This isn't the time. You look severe. Go sit down." I pulled my arm away. I did not yank it. I simply removed his access to me. I stepped up to the microphone. The sound engineer, prompted by the device I had planted, boosted the volume. My voice didn't just fill the room. It commanded it. "We often speak of value in this room," I said, my voice cool and steady. "We speak of assets, of leverage. But tonight, I want to talk about transparency." The word hung in the air like frost. The ambient chatter died instantly. "Transparency," I continued, scanning the faces of the investors, "is the only thing that separates a legitimate deal from a crime scene. And true ownership, well, that is often hidden behind layers of arrogance." I looked down at the front row. Marjorie sat there, clutching her champagne flute, her eyes wide with shock. Delilah sat next to her, occupying the seat that should have been mine. They looked like a portrait of the perfect family, freezing me out of the frame. Delilah smirked, assuming I was having a breakdown. I turned my gaze to the other side of the stage, where Elliot Carr, the CEO of the purchasing firm, stood waiting with his legal team. "Mr. Carr," I said, addressing him directly. Elliot straightened his tie. He looked nervous. He knew exactly who had flagged the discrepancies in the due diligence files 3 days ago. "Mrs. Hale," Elliot asked. "For the benefit of the shareholders present," I asked, my voice cutting through the silence, "can you confirm that the ultimate beneficial owner of the controlling interest is present in this room tonight?" Brandon laughed. It was a loud, barking sound meant to shatter the tension. He stepped between me and Elliot, blocking my line of sight. "Oh, Vivian," Brandon chuckled, waving a dismissive hand at the crowd. "You have to excuse her. Everyone. We are expecting. It is early, but the hormones, they make her a little intense. She gets these ideas in her head and just runs with them." A ripple of relieved laughter went through the room. Of course. The hysterical, pregnant wife. It was the perfect cover for his dismissal. He wasn't abusing me. He was tolerating me. He was the saint dealing with a hormonal wreck. "Go sit down. Viv," Brandon hissed in my ear, his hand gripping my shoulder again. "You are embarrassing yourself. We will talk about your allowance later if you behave." I looked at his hand on my shoulder. Then I looked at his eyes. I did not blink. "I am not here for an allowance, Brandon," I said into the microphone, letting every person in the room hear the steel in my voice. And Mr. Carr did not answer my question. Elliot cleared his throat. He looked at Brandon, then at me. "The beneficial owner is present," Elliot said carefully. "And we serve at the pleasure of the controlling vote." The crowd murmured. They assumed Elliot meant Brandon. But Brandon looked confused. He hadn't briefed Elliot to say that. I stepped away from the podium. I did not go back to the shadows. I walked straight toward the long mahogany table where the contracts lay waiting. I moved not like a wife approaching her husband, but like a CEO approaching a vault. The crowd parted for me. No one dared to stop me. Then let us sign, I said, but let us make sure we know exactly whose signature matters. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and withdrew a single sheet of cream-colored paper. It was heavy, textured stock, the kind used for documents that change history. I placed it gently on the mahogany table, covering the contract Brandon was about to sign. "What is this?" Brandon asked, his laugh nervous and thin. "A grocery list." "Read the header, Brandon," I said softly. He looked down. His eyes scanned the document. Then he blinked. He leaned closer, squinting as if the words were written in a foreign language. I saw the exact moment his reality fractured. He had always assumed the holding company backing his loans, VC 91, was an anonymous venture capital fund. He thought the letters stood for venture capital. He never once considered they stood for Vivian Caldwell. This isn't possible," Brandon stammered, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "You don't own anything. You are just a housewife. And you are a squatter," I corrected him. "You have been trading on capital that belongs to the Caldwell estate. My estate." Marjorie pushed her way to the front, her face flushed with indignation. She grabbed the paper, barely reading it before crumpling the corner. "You greedy little leech!" Marjorie shrieked, her voice cracking. "How dare you! You think you can forge some paper and claim my son's hard work! You came from nothing! We took you in! We gave you a name!" I looked at my mother-in-law with genuine pity. Her ignorance was almost impressive. "You gave me a name I did not need. Marjorie," I said. "You were so obsessed with my lack of social standing that you never bothered to run a background check on my maiden name. My grandmother believed that wealth should be silent. She set up the trust to remain invisible until a designated trustee decided it was time to speak." The room was deadly silent. The investors in the back were craning their necks. The buzz of conversation had died, replaced by the heavy tension of a public execution. Brandon leaned in close to my face. I could smell the scotch on his breath and the fear sweating through his pores. "I will have security drag you out by your hair," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "I will make sure you never, ever set foot in this town again." I did not flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. "You can call them Brandon," I said, my voice calm enough to freeze water. "But you can't call back time. You already spent the money. And now, the bank is open." I turned to Elliot Carr. The CEO was standing perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Carr," I said, "who do you work for?" Elliot looked at Brandon, then at the document, and finally at me. He squared his shoulders. "I serve at the pleasure of the controlling shareholder," Elliot announced clearly. "My fiduciary duty is to the owner of the Class A shares." He nodded at me. A collective gasp went through the room. It wasn't loud, just a sharp intake of breath from 200 people realizing they had been betting on the wrong horse. They looked at Brandon. Minutes ago, they had seen a titan of industry. Now, they looked at him like a man standing on a glass floor that had just begun to crack. "This is a mistake," Brandon said to the room, spreading his arms wide, pleading for validation. "She is confused. She is—" I stood back. I didn't need to say another word. I didn't need to deliver the final blow yet. I just folded my arms and watched. I wanted to see how deep they would dig their own graves before I kicked the dirt in. Marjorie decided it was time to burn the house down to save the furniture. She signaled the AV technician in the booth, a young man she had likely bribed with a few $100s, to play the video she had prepared. I knew what it was. It was a montage of out-of-context clips from our home security cameras meant to paint me as an unstable, hysterical woman, unfit for polite society. "Show them!" Marjorie screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the giant projection screen behind me. "Show them who she really is." The screen flickered to life. The room went dark. But the image that materialized was not a video of me crying in the kitchen. It was a high-resolution screenshot of an iMessage conversation. The timestamp was from earlier that afternoon. The sender was Brandon. The recipient was Delilah. The text was blown up to 10 feet tall. Everyone in the room could read the words clearly. "Blocked the cards. She has zero access. By the time she gets to the hotel, she will be panic-stricken." A second message appeared below it. "Let her starve a bit. She needs to learn that without me. She is nothing but a stray dog. She will be crawling back on her knees by midnight." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the silence of 200 people realizing they were standing next to a monster. Brandon froze, his face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked up at his own words he had typed with such arrogant confidence only hours ago, now towering over him like a tombstone. Then came the audio. It was not the security footage Marjorie wanted. It was a crystal-clear recording from the microphone Delilah had unknowingly carried into the powder room earlier that evening. Marjorie's voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers, sharp and venomous. "Make sure she sits in the back. Delilah. I want her to feel small. If she tries to speak to Mr. Sterling, cut her off. We need to break her spirit before the divorce papers are served next week." The gasps from the audience were audible this time. This was not just a marital spat. This was a conspiracy. It was a calculated, systematic psychological demolition of a spouse. Suddenly, a low, buzzing hum filled the room. It started softly and grew rapidly into a mechanical roar. It was the sound of 300 smartphones vibrating simultaneously on tables and in pockets. A massive data packet had just been pushed to the email addresses of every guest on the registered invite list. "What is that?" someone whispered near the front. "It is the ledger," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the rising panic. Anyone who wants to protect their reputation should read the file labeled solvency before they invest another dime. The room erupted into chaos. Investors scrambled for their phones. I watched as faces lit up in the glow of their screens. They were scrolling through PDFs of falsified invoices, hidden debt structures, and emails where Brandon explicitly discussed hiding losses from the board. "No, no!" Brandon screamed, lunging toward the crowd. This is fake. It is AI. It is a deep fake." She faked my voice. She faked the texts. He looked wild, his eyes darting from face to face, begging for someone to believe him. "It is a lie," Brandon shouted, grabbing Elliot Carr's arm. "Elliot, you know me. You know I wouldn't." Elliot pulled his arm away as if he had been touched by a carrier of a plague. He was looking at his own tablet, where his forensic team had already begun analyzing the metadata of the leaked documents. "The DKIM signatures match the company servers." "Brandon," Elliot said, his voice cold and final. "And the timestamps on these texts. They align perfectly with the server logs. This is real data." The mood in the room shifted instantly. It went from scandalous curiosity to a deep, terrifying chill. These people were sharks, and they just realized the water they were swimming in was poisoned. They looked at Brandon not with judgment, but with the cold calculation of creditors realizing their assets were gone. Delilah took a step back. She looked at the screen, then at Brandon, and finally at Marjorie, who was standing frozen with her mouth open. Delilah realized in that moment that she was not the queen in waiting. She was the getaway driver for a robbery that had just gone spectacularly wrong. I didn't know," Delilah stammered, her voice trembling. I just did what they told me. She retreated into the shadows of the stage, trying to put distance between herself and the burning wreckage of the Hale family reputation. But there was nowhere to hide. The lights were on, and everyone could see the dirt. The double doors at the side of the ballroom opened with a quiet, pneumatic hiss. Rowan Pierce stepped through. He did not look like a guest. He moved with the focused, lethal efficiency of a man who billed $1,200 an hour. He carried 2 leather-bound folders. He walked straight past the security guards, who instinctively stepped aside, recognizing the aura of legitimate authority. Rowan stopped directly in front of my husband. He did not offer a handshake. "Brandon Hale," Rowan said, his voice level and devoid of warmth. "You are hereby served." He thrust the thicker folder into Brandon's chest. Brandon caught it reflexively. The cover was transparent, revealing the bold, capitalized letters of the filing. It was a petition for divorce, coupled with an ex parte emergency order for the immediate freezing of all marital and corporate assets. Rowan did not wait for a reaction. He turned slightly to the right, facing the woman in the red dress. "Ms. Vance," Rowan said, handing her the second, thinner envelope. "This is a notice of a civil suit regarding your role in the conspiracy to defraud the Hale marital estate. It also outlines your liability for the misappropriated funds used to purchase." Rowan glanced at her wrist. "That bracelet. I strongly suggest you retain separate counsel." Delilah took the envelope as if it were burning hot. Her face went slack. The arrogance she had worn like armor disintegrated instantly. Marjorie stepped forward, trying to physically block Rowan from her son. She summoned the imperious tone she used to bully waiters and junior associates. "This is ridiculous," Marjorie shouted, her voice trembling with indignation. "Rowan, I know your father. We are civilized people. We can go into the study and discuss this. There is no need for theater." She looked around the room, expecting the crowd to rally to her defense. But the investors and bankers were not looking at her with respect anymore. They were looking at her with the detached curiosity one reserves for a car crash. Her social capital had evaporated the moment the text messages hit the screen. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and the man who had tried to erase me. "Do not flatter yourself, Brandon," I said. "I am not doing this because you slept with her. Infidelity is boring. I am stopping you because you forgot that I am a human being. You tried to turn me into a depreciating asset on your balance sheet. You thought you could manage me, leverage me, and eventually write me off. But you forgot one thing about assets." Brandon looked at me, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Vivian, please. The deal. If we do not close tonight, assets can be liquidated." I finished. Brandon's phone rang. It was a shrill, demanding sound in the quiet room. He pulled it from his pocket. The screen flashed, "Sovereign Bank, custodial desk." He answered, his hand shaking so badly he accidentally hit the speaker button. "Mr. Hale." A professional metallic voice echoed through the ballroom. "We are calling to inform you that the outbound wire for the Titan acquisition has been flagged." "Push it through!" Brandon yelled at the phone. "I am the CEO. I authorized it." "The authorization is insufficient," the banker replied. "We have received a blocking instruction from the Class A controlling shareholder. The account is frozen pending a federal compliance review." The call ended with a click. Brandon lowered the phone slowly. He looked at me with dawn breaking in his eyes, the realization that this was not just a ruined party. This was a criminal investigation. I watched him unravel. I needed one more thing. I needed him to say it out loud. "The liquidity crunch, Brandon," I said, my voice soft, inviting him to explain. "When the bank froze the main line, where did you pull the deposit money from? You did not touch the employee pension fund, did you?" It was the question that cornered a desperate animal. He didn't think. He just reacted to the pressure. I had to, Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. It was just a bridge loan. I was going to put it back on Monday. It was only temporary. A collective gasp went through the room. He had just confessed to embezzlement in front of the most powerful financial regulators in the city. Thank you, I said. That was the final confirmation we needed. Brandon did not wait for the elevator. He bolted toward the service stairs, his expensive dress shoes skidding on the polished marble. He was running on pure panic, fueled by the delusion that a physical signature on a piece of paper could somehow override a digital blockade. He believed that if he could just touch ink to the contract, the laws of banking would bend to his will. I did not run. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer and walked toward the main elevator bank. I moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of fate. Elliot Carr and Rowan Pierce flanked me, silent and grim. We were not chasing a fugitive. We were walking to a coroner's inquest. When the elevator doors slid open on the VIP floor, the air in the hallway was thick with shouting. We walked into the private boardroom. It was a scene of absolute disintegration. Brandon was leaning over the long mahogany table, a fountain pen clutched in his trembling hand, screaming at a terrifyingly pale junior legal associate. "Turn the page," Brandon roared, spit flying from his lips. "I am the CEO of this company. I am ordering you to turn the page to the signature line." The associate was backing away, holding his hands up as if warding off a blow. His laptop was open on the table, the screen pulsing with a bright red warning banner. "Sir, I can't," the young lawyer stammered. "The system has flagged a level 1 compliance breach. If I let you sign this while the funds are contested, I will be disbarred. I could go to jail." Brandon did not hear him. He grabbed the heavy document, tearing at the corner as he frantically flipped to the back page himself. He jammed the gold nib of the pen toward the paper, desperate to make his mark. I stepped forward and placed my blue folder directly over the signature line. The pen skidded harmlessly across the cardboard cover, leaving a jagged ink streak. Brandon jerked his head up. His eyes were bloodshot, wild with the adrenaline of a trapped animal. "Get out of my way, Vivian," he hissed, his voice wet with desperation. "I have to fix this. If I sign, the deal is binding. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I can fix the money later. Just let me sign." "You are not fixing anything, Brandon," I said, my voice low and devoid of pity. "You are just documenting the crime. If you sign that paper while the funds are frozen, it is no longer just bad business. It is wire fraud. You sign that, and you are not closing a deal. You are signing a confession." A man in a gray suit, the senior partner from the custodial bank, stood up from the corner of the room. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Brandon with professional detachment. "Mrs. Hale is correct," the banker said. "We have just received the digital certificate from the trust. Mrs. Hale has sole signatory power over the collateral. Your signature is worthless." Brandon slumped. The fight drained out of his body, leaving him looking smaller, older. He looked at the pen in his hand as if he did not understand what it was. The door behind us opened again. Delilah stood there. She was no longer the vibrant, arrogant woman in the red dress who had laughed at me downstairs. She was shivering. She walked to the table, avoiding Brandon's gaze, and placed a small silver USB drive on the polished wood. "Delilah," Brandon asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" "It is the recording of the strategy meeting from last month," Delilah said, her voice shaking. "The one where you promised me the VP of Operations role if I helped you liquidate Vivian's trust. And the emails where you told me to hide the toxic debt. You traitorous little tramp!" Marjorie burst into the room, breathless from the stairs. She lunged toward Delilah, her face twisted in a mask of fury. "After everything I did for you!" Marjorie shrieked. I picked you. I told you exactly how to dress. I told you what perfume to wear to distract him. I wrote the script for you to humiliate her. And this is how you repay me." The room went deadly silent. Marjorie clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening as she realized what she had just said. She had just confessed to orchestrating the destruction of her son's marriage in front of 3 lawyers and a banker. Brandon looked at Delilah, then at his mother. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The 2 women he had trusted, the ones he had cast me aside for, were turning on him before the body was even cold. He looked at Delilah like a drowning man watching a life raft drift away. "You were recording me?" Brandon asked, his voice breaking. "The whole time?" "I had to protect myself," Delilah whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "You said it yourself. Brandon, in this town, you eat or you get eaten." Brandon dropped the pen. It clattered loudly on the floor, rolling to a stop against my shoe. He looked at me, pleading for some kind of emotional outburst, some sign that I was still the wife he could manipulate. I just looked at him. "I do not need you to collapse, Brandon," I said, turning to the door. "I need the truth to stand up." The arrival of the authorities was not dramatic. There were no sirens and no guns drawn. It was simply the quiet, terrifying entrance of 3 men and 2 women in navy blue windbreakers bearing the insignia of the Financial Crimes Investigation Unit. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of people who did this every day. "Mr. Hale," the lead agent said, stepping over the discarded pen, "we have a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and physical records belonging to Hale Holdings. We also have a temporary travel restriction order. You will need to surrender your passport." Brandon stared at the agent. He looked like a man trying to comprehend a sudden car crash. "This is a mistake," Brandon said, his voice rising in pitch. "My CFO. He cooked the books. I didn't know anything about the debt hiding. I am the victim here." The agent did not blink. He held up a plastic evidence bag containing the silver USB drive Delilah had placed on the table moments ago. "We will see," the agent said. "But the preliminary hash values from this drive match the data leaked to your investors. It suggests the directives came from your personal account." Marjorie tried to step forward, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a rosary. She attempted to summon the fragile, elderly widow persona that had saved her so many times before. "Officer," Marjorie said, her voice trembling with practiced frailty, "I am just a mother. I had no idea my son was under such pressure. Surely I can go home." The female agent stepped in front of her. She held up a tablet playing the audio file of Marjorie instructing Delilah on how to humiliate me. "Mrs. Hale, conspiracy to commit fraud and witness intimidation are serious matters," the agent said coldly. "We need a statement from you regarding your knowledge of the insolvency." The room seemed to shrink. The air grew heavy and cold. I walked to the table where the rejection form lay waiting. I picked up the pen Brandon had dropped. It felt heavy in my hand. I signed my name on the line marked Controlling Trustee. The scratch of the nib against the paper sounded like a gavel striking a block. "I formally deny consent for the asset transfer," I said to the room. "And I revoke all power of attorney previously granted to Brandon Hale effective immediately." Elliot Carr nodded. He looked at his legal team. "Pull the deal." Elliot said, "Trigger the fraud clause. We are initiating a full independent audit of the Hale books starting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." Brandon looked at me. His eyes were wide and hollow. He looked at the signature on the page, then at his own hands. The irony finally hit him. He had spent the entire day gloating because he had blocked my credit card. He thought he had cut off my oxygen. He had not realized that by forcing my hand, he had made me reach for the master switch. He had locked a door only to find out I owned the building. I placed a hand on my stomach. I thought about the life growing inside me. I did not feel sad. I felt a fierce, protective clarity. My child would not grow up watching their mother beg for allowance. My child would not learn that love was something you had to purchase with submission. I loved him, Delilah sobbed from the corner. She was slumped in a chair, her face buried in her hands. He told me I was special. He told me we were partners. I looked at her. She was not a villain anymore. She was just debris. He lied to you. Delilah, I said softly. You were never the partner. You were just the getaway car. And now that he has crashed, he is leaving you in the wreck. Brandon looked at Delilah, but he did not move to comfort her. He looked at his mother, who was avoiding his gaze. He was entirely alone. Vivian, Brandon whispered, his voice cracking. The baby. You can't send the father of your child to prison. Please. I just wanted us to be rich. We were already rich. Brandon, I said, turning away from him to look out the window at the city lights below. You just wanted to be powerful. And now, you are neither. Brandon looked at me with a mixture of hatred and dawning realization. He was finally putting the pieces together. The timing was too precise. The forensic accountant was too ready. The lawyer was too close. You knew, Brandon whispered, his voice trembling. You knew I would block the cards today. You set me up. I did not set you up, Brandon, I said, stepping closer to him until I was the only thing in his field of vision. I simply left the door to the cage open. I knew your ego could not resist walking in. I knew that if I challenged you on the budget last week, you would retaliate. And I knew that your retaliation would be financial. I gestured to Rowan. My lawyer opened the folder he was holding. The text message you sent at 5 o'clock demanding Vivian learn her place was the final piece of evidence we needed. Rowan explained calmly. It proves a pattern of coercive control. By blocking her access to joint funds to punish her, you handed us the grounds for an immediate freezing order on your personal assets. You did not just lose a wife tonight. Mr. Hale, you lost your legal standing. Elliot Carr closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. Hale Holdings is radioactive, Elliot announced. We are withdrawing the acquisition offer immediately. Instead, my firm will be filing a suit for damages and breach of good faith. We will let the forensic audit determine how much prison time is on the table. Brandon fell to his knees. It was a pathetic, ungraceful collapse. He grabbed the hem of my blazer. Vivian, please, he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Think about the baby. You cannot send the father of your child to jail for the sake of our family. Please, just make a call. Stop them. I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no love. Just a cool, clinical detachment. It is because of the child that I am not saving you, I said softly. I will not raise a child in a house built on fraud, and I certainly will not raise a child to think that love looks anything like what you did to me. Marjorie tried one last desperate maneuver. She smoothed her dress and looked around the room, seeking an ally. Surely there is a misunderstanding, Marjorie said, her voice shrill. I am Marjorie Hale. My family founded the— Your family is a liability. Marjorie, the banker interrupted, not even looking up from his tablet. I suggest you save your breath for the deposition. The room was silent. I took out my phone. I opened the master control app for the trust. I selected the profile labeled Brandon Hale and pressed the red button marked Revoke All Access. A second later, Brandon's phone pinged. Then Marjorie's. Then Delilah's. What did you do? Brandon gasped, looking at his screen. My accounts. They are all grayed out. I turned off the lights, I said. Every credit card, every bank account, every security clearance associated with the Caldwell Trust is now inactive. You are not just broke, Brandon. You are obsolete. I turned and walked toward the door. I did not look back. I could hear Brandon weeping, a jagged, ugly sound that echoed off the expensive wood paneling. As I stepped into the cool night air outside the hotel, My phone rang. It was not a reporter. It was the private wealth manager from Sovereign Bank. "Mrs. Hale," the manager said respectfully, "we just wanted to confirm that the protocols are in place. From this moment forward, any transaction attempted by Mr. Hale requiring more than $50 will require your digital signature. Shall we proceed?" "Proceed," I said, "and set his allowance to 0 until the audit is complete." I hung up. I pulled up Brandon's contact info one last time. I typed a final message. "You wanted me to kneel. I only kneel to tie my shoelaces, then step over you." I hit send. I blocked the number. I hailed a cab, settled into the leather seat, and placed a hand on my stomach. The night he blocked my cards. He thought I had lost $5,000. In reality, he had just lost the privilege of ever thinking I was weak. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing Vivian take back her power. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and let me know which country or city you are listening in. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.